This is Black and White, a comics podcast. My name is Dave.
And I'm Matt.
And this week, we are throwing it back to the 90s. We both read Rise of the Midnight Suns, which is a crossover involving Ghost Rider and some other characters sort of in that occult realm. It was kind of a slog at points, not gonna lie.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, some of the individual issues in there were like 30 plus pages.
Yeah, no, yeah. I when we got to the back half of the trade or whatever, and I saw they were like 30 pages, and I'm like, oh man, we're gonna be recording soon. I'm like, I'm in trouble. Let me see if I can get this in. But
yeah, same. And I benefited a little bit, and I'll touch on that later because I've read this stuff before. But before we get into this, I just want to set the stage a little bit. Maybe there's some people listening or watching that maybe they weren't alive in the 90s to experience this. Or they didn't get into comics at the time, or they just don't know anything about Marvel. Maybe they're not Marvel fans, maybe they're not Ghost Rider fans. I don't know. But I just want to level set everybody. Because in general, the early 90s were a great time for comics, especially at Marvel. You had Jim Lee on the X-Men. You had Todd McFarlane and Eric Larson on Spider-Man. Rob Liefeld had created two of the most iconic mutants ever. And the New Mutants became so insanely popular and then morphed into probably the best thing to happen to the X-Men in the 90s, which was X-Force. We had Infinity Gauntlet. We had Age of Apocalypse. Frank Miller came back to Daredevil in the early 90s. And there's probably even more that I'm forgetting. But one of the things that is rarely talked about in such high regard from that era is Ghost Rider and the Midnight Suns. It was and still is one of the coolest and most interesting corners of the Marvel Universe. Danny Ketch will forever be my Ghost Rider. And this crossover is where I fell in love with the occult side of Marvel.
Preach. Man. I feel like, hey, man, like, we're going to put our hands on the computer monitor right now. We're going to feed through Brother Dave. Yeah, man. I mean, are you done? I don't know if I can even follow that.
I just wanted everyone to understand,
bro. I felt
where
like
we were at in comics history.
You had that cooped up for like 2 weeks, man. I felt like you had to get that out of you. That's good.
I did because I love it. If you can't tell, I've had this Ghost Rider comic framed up on the wall behind me ever since we started this. Yeah. I've got my Ghost Rider number 28 right here, which was, part one of this crossover. I also have, all the others. I have my Spirits of Vengeance. Got my Morbius number 1.
You have the single issues.
Dude. I've got the Darkhold. I've got Night Stalkers. I got the last part. I've got it all in single. I even have Morbius, Night Stalkers, and Darkhold number 1s that are still in the original poly bag, because this was also a period of time where it was a thing to ship comics in a poly bag with like posters and stuff, and there were posters inside all of those.
Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah. This is my shit.
Yeah. So, from my perspective, or is that?
I was just gonna say. So, for you, I mean, this is the first time reading this.
Yep.
For me, I don't know how many times I've read this. I read it a ton when I was younger. When I was a kid and I first got into this, I ate this Midnight Suns Marvel stuff up, and I've read it a couple of times, in the recent past too, as an adult. So, my perspective on this is coming from a place of nostalgia, and yours is fresh, but this was a comic that was written almost 30 years ago. Like, there's dated references all over the place in there.
See, that's just that we've talked about it before, but I think that's like the history major in me. Like, I appreciate that stuff. I like reading older stuff. Like, there's dated references, but it really doesn't bother me to read that stuff. Ultimately, like, I want to read a good story. I want to read a story I understand. I don't, that's really what I'm looking for. So
some of that stuff bothers me. I'm not gonna lie. Sure. Like, there's in Spirits of Vengeance number 1, Johnny Blaze makes a not joke.
That went over my head. I don't
Yeah,
even know what
like,
that is.
you know, like the whole, like, you'd say something like,
Oh, like not.
yeah, like, oh yeah, we
Yeah.
should go to the movies later. Not.
Not. Yeah.
Like, he does that and then like flicks a cigarette after he says not. Like,
Oh
I
yeah.
rolled my eyes at that. Like, there's some stuff. It's hard to go back and read older comics for me sometimes
For
because of
you,
stuff like
yeah.
that. Because there's like, you know, at the time, those were like relevant cultural references. They make me want to hide under the blanket out of embarrassment that said that, let alone put it in a comic book. Like,
But yeah, like when I'm reading old Spider-Man, they're talking about going to the soda shop and getting a Coke. Like,
right,
yeah, man, when
yeah.
I fly out to visit you, we're gonna go get a Coke. That's gonna be the first thing we go do. Get some of the guys together.
Gotta
and
get a malt.
Coke.
Gotta
Yeah,
get a malt.
get a malt. But like, I don't know. That's the history major. You know, I like old school Superman, Americana part of me that it doesn't bother me. But this was actually a topic I posed to you. I was like, dude, let's read this Midnight Suns. Cause like I just know you're a Ghost Rider guy, and like I honestly like don't really know much about Ghost Rider. I don't even think I've seen that movie, that Nicolas Cage movie. I've
Forgettable.
seen parts of
Don't
it.
bother.
I know it's forgettable, but like I'm sure that was an entry point for a lot of people. I didn't even see that.
Not.
So well, yeah, but there's definitely parts at the end that drug for me, but for the most part, in the beginning, especially, I really enjoyed it. I was trying to keep my screen caps and text messages to a minimum because I knew we were going to record a podcast, but there are just some things they did that they really don't publish today in current comics that I like. Some of the violence and definitely with it, that makes sense. Well, even when I go back and read old Punisher, obviously there's violence, but like some of the occult things and the stuff they're doing, there's not really a lot of that in current Marvel and DC big two comics is what I'm
and
referencing.
Even less in Marvel. I feel like DC is a little more willing to be violent than Marvel.
Yeah, and I've noticed that too. There's more blood in DC comics for whatever reason. But
I feel like it's kind of always been that way for DC.
Okay.
I mean, I can't prove that with any sort of factual evidence. I just feel like they've always sort of leaned heavier into like, violent stuff happening more so than Marvel.
Interesting. So, yeah, that was pretty much my just overall kind of take on it. It kind of, for me, I didn't know all the characters, so it was a little bit like I knew who Johnny Blaze is, I knew who Danny Ketch was from you, but some of the ancillary character, I knew who Jerry Curl Blade was, and like that's what I took away from this. Like Wesley Snipes was badass, but I want my Blade with a Jerry Curl like that. I knew him obviously. Morbius, like I was like, oh, he's that dude in this movie that's coming up, and like this is his origin story. So, or not his origin story, but I learned a little bit more about Morbius.
But it is kind of an origin story for Morbius.
Is it his
because
origin?
This was sort of like a. This was like I don't want to call it a reimagining, but it was more of like a rebirthing of Morbius because he had kind of always been cast as the villain. And you know, another thing that was really popular at Marvel in the 90s was the anti-hero. You know, you had Punisher, very, very popular, Venom, very, very popular. And Morbius was another one of those types of characters. You know, his whole shtick is that, you know, he's forced to feed on human blood as a vampire. So to kind of make it right in his mind, he only feeds on criminals and those deserving of death, which is, I think, a really cool take on like the vampire trope.
Maybe I just love like, I'm nostalgic, not really for the violence, but like grimy New York City. Like that's how it was. And like you could see Morbius in the Punisher, like walking around in like grimy New York City, like being anti-heroes doing their thing. So yeah, dude, I don't know if I'm just like a nostalgic, and I guess I would have been like a normie. I was really young, like in 92, I would have been like 6 years old. So like I probably wasn't reading a lot of comics and stuff, but like X-Men, the animated series is big for me. That was where I was like, oh, I like these guys. This is my team. Spider-Man cartoon. I didn't really watch it that much, but I'm nostalgic for it. I remember it. I remember it being on Fox when I was growing up. So like, I didn't read this material, but I have like most of that Jim Lee X-Men run. Like I have all of the issues he was on, but like that's just like my X-Men team. That is my X-Men 6-player arcade team. So like I collect that stuff, and I'm noticing now as I'm dropping off of more and more current books, I'm going back and I'm enjoying Frank Miller Daredevil, old Punisher, and stuff like this. So
I mean, so you've never read Ghost Rider before. Like,
I've never read any
this
Ghost.
this is kind of a weird introduction to the character, because like I said, Danny Ketch is my Ghost Rider, and into this crossover, Danny's not even Ghost Rider. Like, Ghost Rider can't change back to Danny because Danny's technically dead in this comic. So it's a bit of a, you kind of got introduced to Ghost Rider the way I did, because this was one of the first things I read about Ghost Rider too, was like the Danny Ketch version. But what are your thoughts on Ghost Rider as a character after reading this?
Dude, so I would just straight up go around. It reminded me from that move from the Shadow of Mordor when he grabs the trolls, the penance stare, how he like looks into their soul.
I didn't play that game.
It's pretty much the penance stare. You can interrogate people and find information, but great mechanic, by the way. But yeah, I love that penance stare, but that's like what I thought of. Who doesn't like a badass dude on a bike with a flaming skull, like whipping a chain around and like beating people up? Like, I can totally see how young Dave was like, this is the greatest thing ever. Like, how would you not? I feel like Todd McFarlane said something like, just give it muscles and put chains on it, and like you'd love it.
Isn't that how he created Spawn?
Like, pretty much. Which I'm collecting Spawn, going back and getting the old Spawn now too. But so you answered my one question. Like, Danny Ketch was like dead, and so Ghost Rider's just like the spirit, and he can like, he's not like a symbiote, but he's like independent and can like do his own thing. I didn't know if he had to be attached to a person, because obviously Johnny Blaze is running around with the shotgun and the Hellfire gun, and Ghost Rider is his own entity.
So he does.
I need a clarification on that.
He has to be attached to a person. The way that Ghost Rider came about with Johnny Blaze is that Johnny sells his soul to come back and exact vengeance on the people that I believe killed his father, or maybe he died in an accident too, and he came. I don't remember. I don't know the Johnny Blaze origin all that well, which probably makes me sound like a bit of an idiot right now. But again, Johnny Blaze, not my Ghost Rider, but that's how the whole, like, that's how the thing works. Like, he is the spirit of vengeance in the sense that when something needs avenging, Ghost Rider comes out to then go and exact vengeance. When innocent blood is spilled, the spirit of vengeance takes over and Ghost Rider comes out. And the transformation from human to Ghost Rider is pretty gruesome. The skin melts away and they basically burn away into Ghost Rider.
I love those Superman characters, those bright and shiny characters too. But like, I do dig, as we talked about previously, Daredevil, Catholic guilt, like these good people that are tormented. Like,
yes,
the spirit of you. If you walked around and I didn't know what you were, and you're wearing a Ghost Rider t-shirt or whatever, I'm like, this dude's like some like Satanist or whatever. He's like a bad person, but like, he's a good man. He just,
that's kind of a wild stretch to like somebody in a Ghost Rider t-shirt. You're like, this guy sucks. Come on, man. What kind of weird judgment was that?
People wearing chains and all this. That's the world we live in. I don't
live in that world, actually. I've never seen somebody's comic book character t-shirt and thought, this guy stinks.
I haven't seen.
He must be a bad guy.
I haven't seen many Ghost Rider t-shirts in general. I'll be honest with you there.
I have one, but I didn't wear it because I couldn't find it. I think it's packed away. I have like a whole plastic bin full of old comic book shirts that I don't wear anymore.
All right, well, let me rephrase that. Then, like, heroes, like, the Punisher's not really a hero, but like, he doesn't even do heroic things, I guess, but he's justified sometimes in what he does. And Ghost Rider is justified in what you like. They're extreme means, but they're justified in what they do.
Yeah.
And I like those characters.
The penance stare is one of the coolest things in comics.
Yeah.
Like, if you just go and read just like some standard Ghost Rider comics, like not one of these crossover events, and just get to see him like using the pen and stare on just like a mugger on the street, like stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
he'd stab somebody in a mugging, and then gets the pen and stare. Like absolutely just wrecks these people. Like they fall to their knees, like they're broken afterwards. Like it's so brutal.
Oh
But I
yeah,
like
dude.
that. Like I like the punishing nature of the pen and stare.
And I'm gonna have to chat with you offline because, like, yeah, I after reading this, like I said, the Lilith character, I was like kind of confused. I mean, I got it. It's the big bad. She's trying to get power. She's bringing all her little children, demon hellspawn thing. I get it, but like, I want to just read some like straightforward like Ghost Rider, whatever he does. I guess avenging innocence, like not crossover related, because that did. I feel like there was more of him and Johnny Blaze for like the first 3 chapters, and then the other ones it reintroducing these characters, and then they'd be at the end, and then there was like the climax and the fight, and it
Yeah.
was over.
Well, and that was
And then,
that was kind of indicative of the times because these types of crossovers in the 90s, most of the time, were done to just drive sales of the other books. Like,
I mean, it makes sense.
look at the numbering for this crossover. It started in Ghost Rider number 28 and it finished in Ghost Rider number 31. 29 and 30 came out and had nothing to do with this crossover.
Okay, because I thought I was doing my tracking sheet for my comics, and I'm just like, it jumped from 28 to like 31.
Yeah.
Like, what?
There's a Wolverine guest star in 29, and then in 30, it's a story with Nightmare. And then 31 came out to finish the crossover.
Okay, so I'm gonna applaud. Well, I was gonna applaud them. Did you read those stories? Like, what's going on if there's like this time?
I mean, I read
like,
them at the time. I didn't go back and read them this time, though. I just
so
stuck
I
to the
was,
crossover.
so I was going to applaud them at the end of one of the chapters. It was the Morbius chapter where he ends up feeding off of his girlfriend or friend or whatever, and then at the end, it's like Spider-Man's there, and he's like, "I'm gonna get to the bottom of this and whatever," and I'm like, "Oh my goodness, shared universe!"
Yeah.
Like,
well, I mean,
which we don't have a lot anymore, and that's what I'm like. Picks up in Spectacular Spider-Man. I'm like, oh my god, it was just shared universe.
Yeah.
And I missed like that's what I want out of my comics. So yeah.
Same. Me too. And that's that's maybe I wasn't as bothered by the crossover as a lot of people were at the time in the 90s because I was a kid and didn't know any better. I just thought it was cool when they crossed over like that and like Spider-Man showed up in my occult comics.
Yeah.
There's a crossover in Spirits of Vengeance. It's like Spirits of Vengeance number 4 or 5, where it crosses over with Venom and the X-Men.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, they're just throwing everything against the wall. Like, if you're a popular character, you're gonna guest star everywhere we can to drive sales.
Yeah, I was looking.
That was just the landscape of like the comics business at the time.
Well, and this is getting me like these older comics. I need to just stay disciplined and read them on Marvel Unlimited. But I'm like, every time I go to the comic shop, I see these epic collections and I want to get them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'll just get Spider-Man and the X-Men and maybe Punisher and Daredevil and start collecting them. But I was looking at the one that's coming out like in a couple weeks or whatever, and it was an X-Men one. So Uncanny X-Men, and then there was like 3 issues of Venom in it. And I'm like, what? And that's like kind of what you're talking about, just like random characters. Like, what is going on?
Yeah. I mean, the intent of the crossover was to like launch the branded Midnight Suns like pocket of the Marvel universe. So that's, all of those number ones like Night Stalkers, the Darkhold, and Morbius, like they launched those comics in the crossover. And it's very smart, from a business perspective, because if you want to read the crossover and get the whole story, you're going to pick up the other parts of the crossover, and they happen to be number 1 issues of new comics. So, it worked on me because I kept buying all those comics. I loved all 3 of those. I bought all 5: Ghost Rider, Spirits of Vengeance, and the 3 I just mentioned. I bought them all until they were gone. They were done. Like,
gotcha. I think I was good on everything. Like what was the Darkhold? I was kind of confused on that, what the Darkhold was.
So the Darkhold right now is complete. It's a book of the occult.
Okay.
And at the time that this story happens, the Darkhold has not been seen in some time. But pages of the book starting to reappear, and that tiny dude in the
Okay.
suit.
Yep. Who's looking around?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's basically, showing up with pages of the Darkhold
Okay.
and causing havoc.
Okay.
In the current Marvel universe, the Darkhold is complete. There actually just was a Darkhold story that was
There
like,
was, yeah,
I
yeah.
haven't read it yet. I have it
I think
saved on Unlimited, but
Kyle Higgins wrote it, I think.
yeah.
But,
And the Darkhold will be in a new Doctor Strange movie coming out this year.
Blade. In the film, did Deacon Frost did not bite Blade's mother, did he? I don't think so.
I
It's
don't
been so long.
remember.
Because that was Steven Dorff, so I was picturing Steven Dorff when we were talking about.
I didn't love those Blade movies, man. I don't really love any Marvel movies before the MCU existed.
Oh, Blade was kind of dope. He didn't have a Jerry curl though, so it's not in canon for me anymore. No longer.
Blade was acceptable due to comparison bias to other awful Marvel movies that had come out before it. Like, congratulations on being the best of the worst. Like, that just doesn't fly with me. Like, I can't get behind that.
Yeah.
I know that kind of makes me sound like an elitist and a bit of a snob, and I suppose I am, but sorry.
Big. I think it was like a product of the time too, with like Wesley Snipes and not martial arts, but just a big action movie, I guess. Obviously, big in the Black community. Like, we got a superhero, so that was like kind of. I remember my uncle's like, "I'm about to see Blade," and I was like, "Dude, that's a comic book character. Like, you don't know anything about that." So, like,
Wesley Snipes was in it though.
And Wesley Snipes was in it,
and it was a good casting. So. I'll give him that. Like, Wesley Snipes was great to play Blade. Looked like Blade.
Yeah.
Like, he had like the jaw and like the facial structure and like like everything about him was like, man, this dude was kind of born to play Blade.
It's kind of like the Jason Aaron Avengers now. He does look like Wesley Snipes too.
Yeah.
Like the last issue of that share when he's like, "I'm the sheriff of this town." That is like,
yeah.
And it's a splash page. I was like, that's Wesley Snipes.
Oh yeah.
Like,
oh yeah, 100%. So one thing that I think I'm a little disappointed about is that they don't have like the subsequent Midnight Suns crossovers on Marvel Unlimited to read.
Ooh, and that's what I was wondering, because I was like, it looked like all those #1 issues and that was it. And I'm like,
yep.
How are we gonna read the rest? Or
there's one called Midnight Massacre that happens a year or two later, and then there's like a big one called Siege of Darkness that was like 19 parts. Very cool, very cool. And Lilith continues to be around during the whole existence of the Midnight Suns branded comics. A lot of good stuff in there, but you'd have to go and track down single issues because it's not in trade either. Like, it just
is it on Unlimited?
No, that's what I'm saying. None of that stuff's on Unlimited.
No.
They don't even have all of that.
Comixology.
Oh, probably. I don't know. I haven't looked on Comixology. But even like on Marvel Unlimited, they don't have that full run of Ghost Rider that like it goes up to like issue 30 something, and then you get number 94, which is the last issue. They don't put it all on there. I mean, that's one of the things I don't like about Unlimited is that you don't get complete runs of things.
Now that you say that, I feel like the Midnight Sun stuff even got up relatively recently too. Like, they added some of the older issues in like recently, like within the past maybe couple of months.
I think you're right.
That's unfortunate. I was looking forward to reading some more of it. Yeah. Like that, I did enjoy it. I wanted to read some more, but
well, can't help you there. Not on Marvel Unlimited. You can go buy it digitally maybe on Comixology, but good luck figuring out how to search for them and browse for the right issues to purchase on that awful site.
I don't even want to talk about it.
Fair enough. What else? What else do you want to talk about? I feel like you have more thoughts on this than I will because of my many reads of these comics.
No, I just there was just a lot of things that you can't do in comic books today. Morbius's love. I just wrote like Maritime or whatever, like his love interest,
Martine.
and can't
Martine.
read Martine. Okay,
Martine.
Maritime, whatever.
Think about the Maritime Museum back in Erie,
Yeah,
Pennsylvania.
back in Erie, Pennsylvania, when she they find out that the doctor's trying to actually poison and kill Morbius from, I think, Lilith's influences, if I was reading that properly. And she finds a doctor and pulls a gun on the doctor and pulls a gun on the goons. And then the doctor takes the gun and shoots her. And on her dying breath, like, she's like, I love you to Morbius. And he's like, I love you back. And that was sad. But then Morbius fed on her and sucked her dry, and they like showed it. And I was like,
yeah.
This is stuff you can't do in comics anymore. Morbius grabbing a man and throwing him out of a window. You don't really see that very much in comics anymore. Like,
I mean,
but that's
if you see it from Marvel, it's always in like a Marvel Max comic or like,
yes,
you know,
like
it's not
like
in the regular Marvel universe.
Yeah, things like definitely happen. Like people like die and stuff, but like it's just that 90s grit. Like sometimes I just like watching the Punisher blow guys away. Like that's just what I'm in the mood for sometimes.
I also really like the sound effect words for when Morbius feeds. There's a lot of like slurp and schluck.
Yeah, like
sounds.
Maybe that's
like it's
like red. It looks like your room. It's very red, and like they use very thick reds. So we talked about what was her name? Martine. Maritime. We talked about
man.
We talked about Maritime. We talked about Peter Parker in the continuity. The one issue, Lilith is going to attack and get back on them by releasing the spaghetti monster from the Pastafarian church. It was like this thing with all these.
Yeah.
It looked like a spaghetti monster, and the only way that it died is because an angry pack of birds ate the spaghetti monster. And that was it. It was just very interesting. That's when it started kind of going off the rails.
The Darkhold issue is the weakest one of the crossover. Yeah, like that was, and of all of the comics, it's also the weakest one of the comics, in my opinion.
So, yeah, there's just some characters that I didn't know about, but like overall, I think I got the story for the most part. But I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy my time.
I'm glad you did.
It makes me want to read. It makes me want to read some other. I wanted to read more of this, obviously, but I know another one that I've wanted to read for a while and I just haven't gotten around to, and it's very 90s. It's Maximum Carnage. And I was actually reading that a little bit before you got on the call. And I was like, oh, okay. So that'll be probably on the list at some point to get to. But I did really enjoy this.
That's Maximum Carnage is very 90s, as you're well aware.
Yes.
And it's my favorite Spider-Man story of all time.
Oh, that needs to be on the list then.
I feel like Ghost Rider shows up in that somewhere too, if I'm not mistaken. I feel like we get a little Ghost Rider action in there. One of the things that I think is the most upsetting to me as a Ghost Rider fan is that after this Ghost Rider series ended, it ran for it technically ran for 94 issues, but it stopped at 93 at the time, and it took them years to put out number 94. Like number 94 was like a recent wrap up of that series. For whatever reason, never happened. I should know why it didn't, but I don't. But since then, they have done nothing right with Ghost Rider in the comics, and I can't figure out if it's because this comic was just right place, right time. And by right time, I mean the 1990s. Like, he just like struck a chord with the people at the time that read comics where he was so popular. And then since then, it's just never been able to find its audience, or maybe that audience just no longer exists. I don't know, but they've tried so many different iterations of Ghost Rider. They brought Johnny Blaze back as Ghost Rider. They did Ghost Rider and Max comics instead of regular comics. They got the Robbie Reyes drives a car Ghost Rider. There's a female Ghost Rider who I believe was Native American. I'm not sure. Her and these then, except for Robbie Reyes, none of these characters or series stick. You know, like the female Ghost Rider, lasted like 6 or 7 issues.
I
They
mean, that's
started,
current day Marvel though too.
yeah,
So
but it's not like they just
Robbie
relaunched
stuck
it.
around.
Like they would just throw these things against the wall. Like they had Garth Ennis writing Ghost Rider, Johnny Blaze Ghost Rider for Marvel Max. Did like 2 6-issue minis, and that was it. Dude, I would have bought 60 issues of Garth Ennis writing Ghost Rider.
That's what I was gonna say.
And you let him write the Punisher for about 64 issues for Marvel Max. Like, why did no one pick up Ghost Rider? Like, I don't know. I guess not, because if you're not selling, we're not printing. That's kind of how comics works. But it's sad to see this character just sort of fall off a cliff in the Marvel universe, like, to the point where it's very clear that the character is not even worthy of showing up in a team book, except for Robbie Reyes, who is a current member of the Avengers.
Yeah.
They did a Ghost Rider series like 1.5 2 years ago or something, where it was touted as like the return of Danny Ketch as Ghost Rider. Yeah, no, it wasn't. Johnny Blaze was Ghost Rider, and Danny Ketch was like some fucking villain. And it got canceled after I think 5 or 6 issues. It didn't even last like a story arc. Like it was I read it and it was awful. Like the blueprint is there. Like just go back and do what you did in the 90s. Like we'll all go back. All the people that are our age will go back and buy it that loved Ghost Rider in the 90s. Like we'll go and buy it if you just redo it in the 90s style.
Have you read the new series that came out? I think the #1 came out. Did you read it? Was it good?
I loved it. Even though it's Johnny Blaze, it's not my Ghost Rider. It's Johnny Blaze. But I liked it.
So I was very skeptical. Another guy in that corner universe, the Punisher. I was very skeptical of the new Punisher #1. We all have our different thoughts on the Punisher, but like I read that #1 issue. It was really good. So hopefully they can get the 90s characters and bring them back and get them turned around.
I don't know, man. Punisher, I feel like Punisher suffered the same fate as Ghost Rider, just not to the same severity.
At the time. Yeah.
Every Punisher series in recent past doesn't last long. Like, they do weird stuff, like the Franken-Castle thing, like
Matt Fraction. That
wasn't Matt Fraction.
What was this? It was Rick Remender. Yeah, Rick Remender.
Give me Matt Fraction writing Punisher. Yeah. I have hope though with that, like you mentioned, the new Ghost Rider. It was very much on the horror side of things, which I think is the right place for Ghost Rider to be. There's a new game coming out this year. There's a Rise of the Midnight Suns game that Ghost Rider is in.
If it actually comes out.
Oh, it's coming out. Okay. Why wouldn't it come out? What was that for? What's that skepticism for?
Any video game, I'm very skeptical if it's going to come out. That's just me.
I mean, it might not work when it comes out. It might be busted to all hell, but they'll take your $60. Don't worry.
I'm just looking up. Who's the writer on that Ghost Rider series? The creative team. Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Oh, no. Okay.
Remember that was one where Ghost Rider is a character that if it's in the solicitations, I'm buying it regardless.
Okay. Yeah, you got to support it.
Yeah.
Ben Percy.
We'll see how long this one lasts. I have hope that they've done some other things too. They did some weird one shots in the last year that I was like, why now? And why is this happening? There's a character that appears in Spirits of Vengeance and carries through all of those subsequent crossovers named Vengeance.
Okay.
They did a one shot called The Return of Vengeance where that character comes back. He was dead. He comes back to life. They just did one, I think it was 2 or 3 months ago, where Lilith came back.
Really? Okay.
Then we get a new Ghost Rider #1. There's a game coming out called Rise of the Midnight Suns that has Ghost Rider and a bunch of other occult Marvel characters in it. It feels like there's something building currently that might scratch the itch that I have for this really, classic, quote unquote, class is my kind of classic Ghost Rider. But, time will tell.
I mean, if they can do that character right, that would look really cool in the MCU. Like that would be a pretty cool. Maybe that's the next phase, man. The Avengers are done. They gotta. What's going to be the next thing to get people hyped? They're
We'll see
probably
what
gonna.
happens in this Doctor Strange movie, I think.
Yep. I mean, they're gonna. It sounds like they're rebooting the Daredevil Netflix thing and kind of doing their version. So
Well,
maybe it's the street
all those
level
Netflix shows
guys.
are on Disney Plus right now.
They are, but I think they're going to reboot it. So or do something to it. So
I think that somebody needs to come out and say whether those shows are canon or not. Because they were,
won't.
and then they
And
weren't,
won't.
and now they're on
Yeah.
Disney Plus. Same thing with Agents of Shield. It was,
Yep.
then it wasn't. Now it's on Disney Plus. P.S.
Yeah.
Robbie Reyes, Ghost Rider, is in Agents of Shield.
With the car.
Yeah. I have grown to like the Robbie Reyes Ghost Rider.
Yeah.
I truly have. I as he's been in Avengers, the more he's in Avengers, I've started to appreciate him. I think he's my third favorite Ghost Rider behind Danny Ketch and Johnny Blaze.
And this is what I'm talking about when we talk about like the diversity and all that stuff. Like it took time, but you got there. Like Marvel, they need to like stick with these characters and keep it going and not bail on them. And then eventually some people will come around because you're showing that you're committed to these characters. I'm just overly cynical at this point. So when I see this, you know, some of these changes, like I'm just like, it's going to get rebooted in like 6 months.
Yeah.
So why invest in it? And that's, right. I think where a lot of us are.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. You know, one thing
we
didn't talk
Robbie's
about.
Been around.
Good. Sorry. Good.
No, Robbie's been around since like I was living in Erie, so that was like 2011 ish.
Long time.
That his one series. So yeah, like
long time.
10 years, man. Like good for them. I'll give them credit on that for sure.
I mean, he's a cool character and he's got a cool story.
I like his.
I just think like to me personally, like I get that we've kind of, I don't want to say retconned, but like expanded the lore on Ghost Rider, and that, you know, the spirit of vengeance and its inhabitants, it kind of hellfire-ifies whatever their mode of transportation is. Robbie's happened to be a souped up Dodge Charger or whatever.
Yeah.
Some American muscle car looking thing. You know, you got like the original Ghost Rider riding a fucking woolly mammoth in Avengers, the Dawn of Time. Yep. So whatever, whatever. I accept it. Just give me a good Johnny Blaze or Danny Ketch Ghost Rider series. That's all I really want. But one thing we didn't talk about, going back to the actual comics that we read for this episode, Doctor Strange.
Yeah, man. Kinda was the Michael Corleone pulling everything together behind the scenes, getting the team together. Popped up in a couple issues. So I wasn't aware of that. So I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. So I would assume in the subsequent series that I can't read anywhere, he's pretty impactful and an important part of this. But
by Siege of Darkness, Doctor Strange is in the middle of all of this.
Yeah,
and he does, and that's a role that Doctor Strange has played before. You know, with the Secret Defenders and the Defenders. You know, kind of pulling the right people together to face some sort of mystical or interdimensional threat to the Marvel Universe, to Earth 616. Like that's kind of his role. And it was like the first time that I remember like caring about Doctor Strange. Like I always thought Doctor Strange was super corny. I never liked Doctor Strange. I thought his mustache was stupid. Everything about Doctor Strange was dumb. Like, oh wow, he does magic. That's not a superhero. But like his appearance and his orchestration of this whole Midnight Suns thing, like, kind of got me. I wasn't as hateful anymore about Doctor. I was like, maybe he's all right. Now I love Doctor Strange. I'm all in on Doc Strange.
You put the right artist and the right. Yeah. You put the right artist and the right creative team on, man, they can make you believe in anything. And like Marvel, there's just all of them, but Marvel especially just has really cool characters. Like they just, I don't know, they just do.
Yep. Well, this was a fun little trip down the dark side alley that was the occult pocket of the Marvel Universe. I'm glad you suggested it. I had fun reading it again, even though I didn't do a full reread this time.
And
It was fun to go back.
Next time we walk through that dark, sinister alley and you're wearing a Ghost Rider shirt, I promise I won't judge you and think you're a bad person.
So you admit you've done it in the past.
Sure.
Well, you said next time you won't
Sure.
judge me. It means that in previous times I was judged for wearing that shirt.
I'm a work in progress. It's fine.
We're all a work in progress, man.
I'm human, bro.
If you stop growing, you stop changing, man. You got one foot in the grave. At that point, not to get heavy.
Yeah, I think it's time for us to go. We're getting heavy.
But you know, you might be due for a penance stare if you stop caring.
And with that,
we'll be back in a week. I think we might be jumping over to the DC side of things.
Really?
Next week.
Okay. Yeah,
we'll see.
We'll see. The competition, the distinguished.
Typically during these wrap-ups, we've got the next episode planned. Not today. Not so much today. But we'll figure it out, and we'll be back in a week to record something for y'all to listen to. I do appreciate your time. Hope you enjoyed talking about Ghost Rider. I enjoyed talking about it. I think Matt did too.
Love it.
He loves it. You heard it here first. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Peace.